It was an evening that carried the hush of a city caught between the noise of its own ambition and the stillness that nightfall often brings. The streetlights had just flickered to life, washing the pavement in a soft amber glow, their halos stretching into the mist of dust and faint traces of exhaust left hanging in the air. Amid the endless rush of cars, honking horns, and hurried footsteps, a small corner of the sidewalk held a scene that felt untouched by the chaos. There, sitting cross-legged on the cold stone ground, was a little girl. Her hair was unkempt, strands falling into her wide, observant eyes that reflected the golden light above her. Her hands, tiny and roughened from days of struggle, clutched a dull pencil and a crumpled sheet of paper with the kind of focus that belonged not to her circumstances, but to her dreams. Next to her rested an old, battered schoolbag. Its seams were loose, its zipper broken, and its surface bore stains of years that had not been kind. Yet, inside, peeking from torn edges, were papers, scribbles, and the fragments of stories she had carried with her. To her, that bag was not just an object of necessity but a vault of imagination, her own fragile world where lines drawn with a pencil could build houses, gardens, skies, and schools far more beautiful than the one she knew. She sat beneath the glow of a streetlight, the hum of electricity above her head mixing with the occasional roar of an engine that passed by. The air was heavy with the scent of rain that had fallen earlier in the day, leaving patches of dampness on the road and the faint perfume of wet earth rising from the cracks in the pavement. Vendors had packed up their stalls, leaving behind a lingering smell of fried food and roasted corn. The city's soundtrack, a blend of hurried footsteps, distant laughter, and muffled conversations, seemed to fade away around her. In that moment, she was the quiet center of a restless universe. Parked not far behind her was a luxury car, its sleek black surface gleaming even under the dull glow of the streetlights. It was the kind of vehicle that turned heads, a symbol of wealth and status, out of place on a street where cracked sidewalks and dimly lit alleys were the norm. Leaning casually beside it were two men, their presence as stark a contrast to the girl as the car was to her bag. One of them wore a sharp tailored suit, the lines of his coat perfectly pressed, his shoes polished to a shine that caught the light. A heavy watch gleamed on his wrist, and his posture carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. His name was Asif, a man whose empire was made of steel and glass, of contracts and profits. To the world, he was a success story, a symbol of determination and grit rewarded. Yet behind his calculating gaze was a silence he seldom let surface, a silence shaped by memories he preferred not to revisit. Beside him stood Nadim, dressed in simple clothes, his stance humbler, his eyes softer. He was the driver, a companion to Asif in his travels, yet his world was entirely different. Where Asif lived among the powerful, Nadim lived among the ordinary. His life was shaped by small wages, modest meals, and a constant negotiation with survival. But he had something that wealth had never managed to buy, a tenderness of heart, a way of noticing what others ignored. The two men had been talking casually when Nadim's gaze was drawn to the girl sitting under the streetlight. At first, he thought she was simply scribbling nonsense, passing time as many children of the street often did. But the intensity with which she held her pencil, the way her brows furrowed in concentration, and the fragile seriousness in her small frame made him stop mid-sentence. Sir, he said quietly. Nudging Asif, look there. That child, she seems lost in something. Asif followed his gaze. For a moment, his businessman's eyes scanned her the way one would assess a stranger, quickly, without pause. But something about the stillness of her world in contrast to the restless energy of the city struck him differently. He adjusted his cufflinks absent-mindedly, trying not to let his curiosity show, yet unable to look away. What could she be doing? Nadim wondered aloud. It's getting late. Children her age should be at home, with books, with family. His voice carried a trace of sorrow, as though the scene was personal to him. Asif didn't answer immediately. Instead, he observed. The girl would write something, pause, erase it with her fingers, and try again. Sometimes she drew shaky outlines, he could just make out the shape of a small house, with crooked walls and a tiny garden. At the corner of the paper, she had sketched what looked like a smiling figure of a woman, standing beside another smaller figure, perhaps herself. The innocence of the drawing tugged at something buried deep within him. He had been that child once, sitting under a lantern light in a small, forgotten town, scribbling dreams on whatever scraps of paper he could find. His father had been a laborer, his mother stitching clothes to keep food on the table. There had been nights when hunger had pressed against his ribs like an unwelcome guest, nights when he had wondered if his dreams were foolish fantasies. Yet he had clung to them, and somehow, through relentless struggle, had built the life that now stood behind him in the shape of a luxury car. Nadim, watching closely, whispered again. Sir, do you see her eyes? They shine as if she sees something beyond that paper. Children like her, they have nothing, yet sometimes they dream bigger than those who have everything. Asif frowned slightly, not at Nadim's words but at the storm they stirred inside him. He wasn't a man who liked to show vulnerability, yet here, on this ordinary street, a child's fragile focus was unraveling the armor he wore. He found himself stepping closer, his footsteps measured, careful not to startle her. The sound of his shoes against the pavement made her glance up suddenly, eyes wide, filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. She clutched her paper to her chest instinctively, as though guarding her treasure. What are you doing here, little one? Asif asked, his voice softer than he intended. The girl hesitated. Her lips parted, but words didn't come at first. She blinked up at the tall man in the elegant suit, unsure if he was a threat or a friend. Finally, in a small, wavering voice, she said, I'm writing a story. A story. Asif tilted his head, intrigued. And what story is that? Her small fingers loosened their grip on the paper, and she lowered it slowly so he could see. The pencil marks were faint, uneven, but clear enough to make out. A house, a garden, a woman, a little girl. Scrawled words beneath them, letters shaky but determined, spelled out fragments of sentences. It's about my home, she whispered. The home I will have one day. With my mama. And I will go to school, and we will laugh, and I will write stories every night. Her words hit Asif like a wave. Behind him, Nadim took a step closer, his eyes glistening. What's your name? Nadim asked gently. Amna, she replied, her voice firmer now, though her eyes darted nervously between them. My mama says stories make the heart strong. She told me to write my dreams, because if I keep them inside, they will disappear. Asif swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. There was something in Amna's innocence that stripped him of all pretense. He crouched down to her level, his expensive suit brushing the dirty pavement, a sight that would have shocked anyone who knew him. Where is your mama now? He asked quietly. Amna's eyes clouded. She lowered her gaze to the ground, her pencil trembling slightly in her hand. She's gone to rest, she murmured. She got sick, and now she's with God. But I still write, because one day she will read my stories in the sky. The words cracked open something in Asif's chest that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Memories of his own mother, her rough hands, her weary eyes, her quiet encouragement, flooded back. He remembered her saying, never stop dreaming, Asif. Even if the world laughs, dreams are the wings God gives us. Behind them, the city carried on. Cars rushed by, vendors shouted, a bus honked angrily. Yet within the circle of that streetlight, time seemed to have stopped. Nadim cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. Sir, children like her, they survive only on hope. And sometimes, hope is all they have. If we can give her more than that, even a little, maybe her story won't just stay on paper. Asif looked at Nadim, then back at Amna. For a moment, he saw himself reflected in her fragile determination, the boy he had been, the boy who had wanted the world to see him not as poor, but as possible. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small card, and handed it to Nadim. Bring her to my office tomorrow, he said firmly. His voice carried the tone of decision, the same tone he used in boardrooms, but here it held a different weight. Then, turning back to Amna, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You will keep writing your stories, he said. But from tomorrow, you will also go to school. Your mama will be proud, watching from the sky. Amna's eyes widened, disbelief flickering across her face, then giving way to a timid smile. For the first time that evening, her face lit up not just from the streetlight but from within. Really? She whispered. Really? Asif said, the word carrying a promise he knew he would keep. Thank you, Amna breathed, the simplest of words, yet it landed in Asif's heart with a weight greater than any fortune he had ever earned. As the night deepened, and they finally stepped back toward the car, Asif felt a shift inside him. The world he had built, full of skyscrapers and bank accounts, suddenly seemed incomplete without this moment. Success, he realized, was not in the size of his empire but in the small sparks of hope he could ignite in others. And on that ordinary street, under a flickering lamp, a little girl's dream had changed not only her life but also the heart of a man who had forgotten what it meant to dream. Because sometimes, the greatest lessons come not from wealth or power, but from the fragile hands of a child writing her story under the glow of a lonely streetlight.